This is Back Roads of Illinois server to farmers and ranchers in central Illinois and the Midwest. Today's edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We were bringing you lasted for farming sources and information sponsored by AgriGold. We were glad you're here on a Monday afternoon. I am Cesar Delgado. I am your host of today's program. We were listening to from Dan Halstorm, the president and CEO of the U.S. Meats Federation, about export to China and Mexico, South America. Then I will be talking about the commodities markets, especially in uncertainty with ag trade deficit for right now, with Tyler Shau from agmarkets.net. This afternoon is coming to the Markets Club podcast with Dr. Charles Martinez from the University of Tennessee on the cattle on feeds, and Brian Ernest from CoBank about the beef demand, and Brad Cumia from Cumia Evil Trading about the fundamentals with the beef markets. Otherwise, this is your rural news sponsored by AgriGold. Next week is the deadline for crop insurance by May 15th on PLC or ARC. Some areas vary. China show up to be starting back up for the commodities from the United States. 11 Peng is not going to be back down at the United States. However, China need more demand for their pork industry. Non-farm income is down to 61% in the farm. Plus, the inputs cost is high in the book. Finally, consumers are still strong. CP. High numbers are good for now with their decision on the budget. That's your rural news for this afternoon.
Not only in regards to potential higher costs in general, but one of the key components of that would be relatively high fees imposed on ocean vessels every time these ships stopped at any U.S. port of call. So not only would these fees be passed on to cargo owners through the higher shipping fees, but one of another concerns was that there would be potential service reductions in some of the key ports. One of those key ports being Oakland, which just so happens to be one of the highest volume ports for a high quality chilled U.S. beef and pork going into the Asian markets.
The CEO of the U.S. Meats Federation and the president, Dan Halstorm, are looking for the trade for the Asian markets for trade levels.
First of all, the fees will be assessed on a per voyage basis versus a port of call basis. And also a maximum of 5 times per year is all that any given vessel could be charged. So definitely an improvement from where we were. In addition, there will be a fee assessment schedule based on net tonnage versus on charging a flat fee for every port of call. Lastly, in the same category, there's a improvement in the sense that some of the shorter haul routes into key destinations such as Central America and Colombia, for example, on U.S. beef and pork, the schedule is much more attractive in terms of fees and a lower per pound basis impact. USTR, in fact, did listen to the industry and the concerns that we had. Anything that adds cost to the process is always a concern. But compared to the original proposal, we are very encouraged by these improvements that USTR has made.
Dan Halstorm are concerned about the port fees for the net export for the U.S. meats to other countries like in China, Japan. Philippe, the fees poured are working on it for the markets. Do you want to learn more about the U.S. Meats Federation at usmef.org? Thanks to Chad Smith from NAFB member in Platte City, Missouri for this audio. The following with tariffs and the commodities prices are currently unstable to the fundamentals on the grains markets. It's called from the market. Now he's got to talk about this. It is Tyler Shau from Ag Markets. Tyler, how are you today?
Doing very good. Good to be on with you, Caesar.
Tyler, let's begin with our discussion on the planting progress in the northern plains. How is it?
Where I'm at, North Dakota, we've made pretty good headway on small grains. Had a pretty dry week last week. Got a lot of the crop in the ground. Quite a few of my customers are done. We did get a pretty significant rain event. We did not get as much as was anticipated here. We're kind of forecast, even as of yesterday, to get up to 2 inches of rain. I've not been able to look at the gauge yet today, but I'm guessing we had a little less than half an inch, so maybe less than advertised, but still good. We need the rain on row crops. They don't. It's late April. We could still get a pretty good freeze here into early May. So there's not a lot of guys been chomping at the bit. As you go further south and east, southeast North Dakota, quite a few guys got a lot of beans put in last week. Kind of got started on corn ahead of the rain event. Looks like it's going to be dry and up into the 60s and 70s this coming week. So probably be a lot of corn and beans going to ground as we move forward. Kind of the same story in South Dakota. Our broker in eastern South Dakota said today that he would estimate they're about 30% complete or in the ground down in that area. So ahead of schedule, a lot like most of the country, running ahead of the 5-year average. And so, we're no real concerns on planting progress as we move forward, at least right now.
How is the chickpeas planting in your area, Tyler?
How is the what planting?
How is the chickpeas planting in your area, Tyler?
Chickpeas?
Yeah.
We'll plant some. I'd be right honest with you. I do not work with anybody that grows any. We have some guys work with some other edible beans. Some of those have gotten in the ground. Like I said, most of what's gone in the ground so far has just been your spring wheat and a little bit of durum, your small grains. So most of your row crops and pulses, they'll start going in the ground here over the next couple weeks to the month of May. So try to remind everybody it's still early for the northern plains, and like I said, we can get awfully cold moving forward here. So haven't put just a ton of specialty crops in the ground yet. But like I said, if it dries out and stays warm, I think you'll see a lot of it going in here over the next 2 weeks.
Can you tell us, Tyler, can you tell us what's impact on the beans markets with technical aspects?
Technicals, technicals are at a spot where you could, depending on who the technician is, remember technicals are as much an art as they are a science. And so, the one good news, you had May and July beans, old crop beans finally close above the 200-day moving average. That occurred last Wednesday on May. July did not close above the 200-day moving average. It was awfully close. But the story there is July beans then did close above the 200-day moving average on on Thursday, stayed above it Friday, went down and tested it today. 1050 on July beans is where the 200-day moving average was today. We went as low as 1051 and a half. And we're able to kind of close back up to the upper end of where we've been at. We actually closed the day up 2.5 or 2.25 cents. So on the one front, that looks good. We've gotten over that 200-day moving average, especially in old crop beans. So that's a positive. November beans, a different story. It's been really struggling at that 200-day mark. Currently, that's at 1036 and 3/4. We closed November beans at 1034 and 3/4, down 1/4 cent today. So, it depends on the technician. Some are getting a little impatient. Some feel like the fact that we didn't close above it and just immediately push higher, maybe we're exhausting some of that bullish attitude. Others are still pleased with the fact that the 200-day moving average on old crop beans is holding us. So I would say it's a tale of two coins. I would be cautious. A part of me kind of wants to be a hedger of soybeans here. And I've been selling some old crop beans. On new crop beans, though, JSA did a study. I think I've referenced it with you before. 20 out of the last 20 years, we've at least gone back to the February average insurance price. And this year on November beans, that's at 1054. So we want to be patient, try to get to a 1054 mark on November beans before we start pulling the trigger on additional hedges at this point.
How is the fundamentals on the beans markets for right now with May beans, because it is going to be gone for next week?
Yeah, so that actually goes into first notice day on Wednesday. So any long positions are at risk of delivery on the 30th. So that contract, I always encourage my customers anyhow to basically quit paying attention to the May contract. Now, most of your grain buyers have switched and are buying off the July. Kind of an interesting fact. We're getting some word from around the country that a lot of end users rolled their cash bid from the May to the July over the weekend and kept basis almost unchanged. So you had about a 10-cent spread, or you had an 11-cent spread. They're keeping basis close to where it was. And so the farmer is able to capture that spread on the roll. That's been a positive thing. A lot of times you see that basis weaken when we roll out to the new month and there's a carry in the market. We're not seeing that as of right now. So that's a positive thing for the bean market. It tells us old crop bean, we know we're going to be tight. Ending stocks are wouldn't say super low, but are relatively low. And even without China in the game, we're still meeting some of our export targets. So that's a good thing. We're just going to pay attention to it as we move forward.
Finally, what is your position on the planting progress in the northern plains?
Planting progress is, I wouldn't say it was going to be at breakneck speed. We do feel like there was quite a bit of traction or progress made over the last week. Nothing earth shattering. You had some rains in several areas. I was actually down in Iowa late last week. Did some traveling. I don't feel like they probably got much done. Looks like it was pretty wet. Then they had a pretty good start on the crop, but didn't see much for equipment rolling through the fields while I was there Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So I don't think you saw a lot of additional work get done. Probably kind of right in line with where we were, maybe slightly behind last year, but right in line with 5-year average.
Thanks, Tyler.
You bet. Take care, Caesar.
This has been Tyler Shau from agmarkets.net. Thanks to Tyler Shau from agmarkets.net. This has been Back Roads of Illinois. I am Caesar Delgado. You have a good day.